Hello, and welcome to what is, I don't know, take 16 of trying to get this right. So this is probably going to go up later than it's planned. It's probably not going to be a 6 o'clock launch, so I'm going to apologize for that straight off. But I have been trying to get this right for a while. And I'm going to be talking through this discussion while it's going, and it's going to be UAD video, as is normal on a Friday. If I do a video, it's a UAD video. I have to admit that I am going to calm down the pace of videos at some point. It's just when I have an idea, I record it and then I put it up and just slot it in. It's just there. And this has turned into almost having a video a day for the last few weeks, and I feel like I should calm it down. So I'm sort of thinking and doing other stuff as well, and not working about 20 hours a day. But there again, I'm a functioning insomniac, and I don't have anything else to do with my time when I'm not sleeping, because I have no social life. But I have history, and I have all of you, so do I need a social life? That is a question. Something I would quite happily argue on. Anyway, so today's UAD. Well, from the title, you'll know this is going to be a pre-dreadnought, and it's going to be the rumble in the tumble. Now, you're thinking, what is a rumble in a tumble? Well, it's quite simple. Take the most advanced pre-dreadnoughts that you can build, roughly, as the basis for your plans on UAD, the Lord Nelson class and the Deutschland class. And let's see what happens if the pre-dreaders manage to get into a fight in the North Sea. If somehow some circumstance had contrived that the battle was going to be a pair of Lord Nelsons versus a pair of Deutschlands, and we're going to see what happens. Now, so far, as said, this will be my 16th time running this, so I know roughly what's going to happen. Because I know what's happened so far 9 times out of 15, and I know what's happened 6 times out of 15, and I can roughly tell you where it sort of goes. But that's not the reason I keep re-recording it. I re-record it because I get so wrapped up in watching it that I sometimes, at points, forget to speak and forget to talk about the history which I'm supposed to be talking about while they're on. And I apologise for this. So what I'm doing now is I'm doing this version, but I'm changing the structure slightly to apologise in advance. If at any point you don't hear my dulcet tones for a couple of seconds, that's probably because I'm too busy watching the ships going, ooh, pretty. I apologise, but I'm a ship geek, okay? I'm a naval historian. My dream is to get paid money for talking ship. That's what I want to do. Talk ship. But, well, to earn a living. But if I had my choice between talking ship and just watching ships, thinking how pretty they are, I'd be watching ship. But you don't get paid for watching ship. You do get paid sometimes for talking ship. So that's what I'm here to do. Anyway, without much further ado, let's go to the rumble and the tumble. Woohoo! Now, I will admit that, honestly, I've done a slightly better job with the Lord Nelson than I have Deutschland class, because Lord Nelson class, 12-inch main guns, 8-inch secondaries. I know, not 9.2-inch, but you can't get 9.2-inch secondaries. I did consider trying to go for the 9-inch side guns. But if I just take these off quickly and show you what happens when I try the 9-inch side guns, well, fits. Fits. Okay. That's good. Right then. So now there's supposed to be one in the middle. Doesn't really work. Did consider trying this, but that didn't seem to work either. Although it is, broadly speaking, similar in that it's 9-inch guns, but that's supposed to be a single 9-inch gun in the middle there. It got me to start thinking and start working through what is equivalency of action, equivalency of firepower, what sort of details they put into them. All these things started to be working through, and it's why I ended up with the 6 8-inch rather than the 5 9-inch. I just decided that worked out as pretty much more accurate in terms of equivalency. Although, again, that's not quite what it's supposed to look like, but that is as close as I can get the design to. And I have tried. However, and I say this with love in my heart, there is one of these ships which has caused me more issues than pretty much anything else, and that is this one, which of course will be, well, there are various options amongst the Deutschland class. There's Hanover, Pommern, Schleswig-Holstein, and I think I will go with Schleswig-Holstein because, well, how do I put this politely? It's going to cause a friend of mine to have fun pronouncing it. So, Schleswig-Holstein it is. Yes, I'm being cruel. Yes, he will get his revenge. Now, you'll notice that this ship is slightly heavier compared to the real-life one. That's because if I didn't make it heavier, those 11-inch guns wouldn't fit. And you're going to sit there and go, Alex, that doesn't look like anything like the real-life design. The real-life design has the guns on the same level. That looks practically French. And I'd go, you're right! But for some reason, this is the design of battleship we have. And looking at the other options, well, that's Battleship 1, twisting around in the corner there. Battleship 2 now doesn't look much more like it. Battleship 3 is pretty much the closest you're coming, and even then, to get enough space for the 3 funnels, you have to do all sorts of funny things, and yes, those are 6-inch guns rather than 7-inch guns, broadly speaking, and those are the 4-inch guns. It just, yeah, it's the best I can do, and it carries 4 torpedo launchers rather than 5. I tried. I really did try. Anyway, let's launch. So, what is this really about? What is this about learning? What is the point of having this fight between pre-dreadnoughts, which never really happened? Well, the reality is this. You can learn a lot about secondary weapons, and you can learn even more about primary weapons if you have a fight between pre-dreads. Because, as you'll seen in the video that came out earlier this week about what happened in the Adriatic, well, if you have a fight between a 15-inch gun ship and a 14-inch gun ship, if the 14-inch guns have enough, if there are enough 14-inch guns there, they're going to win. It's about getting the balance right between hitting power and in terms of an individual shell, and hitting power in terms of volume of fire. It's always something you have to balance. Now, these are pre-dreadnoughts. They're going to take the sodding ever. Sorry about language. So it's just politer if I just speed them up. But this is superb. Ah, she's looking superb. But let's go see what the other one's looking like. Ah, there is my beauty. Hello, Lord Nelson's Revenge. You're not quite a Lord Nelson class. You're the revenge of the Lord Nelson class. And yes, believe it or not, they did rock around like that. They were not comfortable things to be at sea in. They were not, under any circumstances, comfortable things to be at sea in. Now, I've been nice to the Deutschland class. Some of them had speed as low as 18.5 knots. Some of them managed 19.1 knots. I've given them a speed of 19 knots. Lord Nelson class, well, they've got 18 knots like their predecessors, like their templates had. And they're doing an lovely job. I have a feeling this could, well, on some occasions, this does turn into a very long-winded artillery duel. I'll just give you that heads now. Hello, superb. This, I have to admit this, Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts does like the name Superb for a British battleship. They seem to be attracted to it, which is fine, but I also think it's some subliminal messaging going on here to make us think that our ships are better than they actually are. And this is, well, let's be honest, this just looks wrong on so many levels. And I am sorry. I am sorry. Battle cruiser? Seriously? You think this is a battle cruiser? There are... Just because it's going 1 knot faster than the battleships, they think it's a battle cruiser? Stig Holstein, I feel so sorry for you. I apologize now. I have insulted your name by building you in this ship. This is not my most beautiful creation. This might be another reason why I tend to not do some of the pre-dreads, because as much as I love the graphics once it comes to the dreadnoughts and the super dreadnoughts designs, really good graphics there. Some of the graphics around the pre-dreads is just interesting, let's say. It's just problematic. Not in a nasty way, but in a, well, there you go. It looks practically French. It just does. It looks French. I'm not sure who'd be more upset for, the Germans or the Germans or Schleswig-Holstein. Or Schleswig-Holstein. Anyway, so let's talk about the classes. Well, the Lord Nelsons are, of course, famously the last British pre-dreads, and they are in many ways a step on the path to the dreadnought. They have 12-inch main guns, and they have 9-inch secondaries. And the British were considering trying for something different. They were actually considering going for a 14-inch gun. And it's one of those joys of history that if the Lord Nelsons had ended up with 14-inch guns, the odds are Dreadnought class would have ended up with 14-inch guns, and that would have been even scarier for the world, because he'd have been straight in, and there'd have been no Germans, we can manufacture equivalency by just loading 11-inch guns onto our ships. Well, no, because your 11-inch gun is never going to match in next to a 14-inch. A 14-inch can compete with a 15-inch. A 15-inch can compete with a 16-inch. But an 11-inch and a 14-inch are a long way apart. A long way apart. I'm staying over with my own ships this time because they look prettier. That is seriously my reasoning of my positioning in this battle. I might go sit over Lord Nelson's Revenge, because she appears to be doing better. And she's eminently scary with that name. For the Germans, though, the Deutschland class were different. The Deutschland class were it. In fact, they outlasted the dreadnoughts in some of their cases. Schleswig-Holstein would serve for many, many years. In fact, she'd serve into World War II. She steamed into into Danzig and was part of the attack on Poland. They were the core ships which kept the German Navy going, and in many ways you have to look at the German fleet of World War II as drawing its roots from the pre-dreadnought era rather than the dreadnought era. Which probably it probably sounds confusing, but think about it this way. In the dreadnought era, you pare down weapons. You go for multi-purpose systems. You go for weapons which can do multiple, can engage light surface units, or can engage aircraft. There's all sorts of options you do to pare things down. If we look at our counterparts over here, which are a good example of us, in pre-dreadnoughts, you don't. In pre-dreadnoughts, you have the gun for every situation. Because you carry them all. This has 11-inch, 6-inch, 4-inch torpedoes. And that's just what I fitted with. I could have been fitted with more. I could have fitted it with more. It produces a fleet which is full of ships which have a range of guns which need to be supported. It's not a very efficient design. In fact, you can say the pre-dreads are... The coming of the era of the dreadnought is not just about achieving an excellent firing solution through standardization of firepower. It's about starting to design ships which are efficiently for actually fighting a war. And there is something about that. The pre-dreadnought is not a very efficient fighting ship. It's something which you're possibly seeing here in that, to be honest, these, which are Anglo-style pre-dreads, which were slightly more pared down to begin with, but also I have pared them down a bit more because I was designing these, are able to function and hold their own with quite a lot of firepower, but they do look a far more simple and far more straightforward design. And that's not just down to UAD, that is the reality of the design aesthetic. Pre-dreadnoughts don't have that. So the moment you have pre-dreadnoughts still forming the core of your fleet for, I don't know, 20 odd years, well, you start to pick up that aesthetic. You automatically think, okay, we need an AA gun. We need an anti-surface gun. We need a main gun. Now, you can say, well, no, we're going to read the theory. We're going to learn the things. We're going to watch other people. We're going to bring in the newest, greatest, and bestest technology and practices. But the reality is, you're also going to have all the stuff which has been baked into your personnel, baked into your crew, baked into their perceptions of how a ship should be. I had some interesting comments recently, and they're mostly on the videos about the German mine-laying cruisers and my various remarks about them, because I have to admit, I'm not always the most complimentary when it comes to my German mine-laying cruisers, mainly because, frankly, they have a lot of potential, but the Germans do pack a lot of weird stuff into them. Especially if they're aiming for a decent light cruiser. Most people come back to me going, well, look, this is the German Navy trying to fit everything in there so they can keep all their skills alive. A little bit of everything to maintain skills, and maintain skills in production, and maintain skills in use. And I can understand that perception. I can. But I think it's not just that. I think it's that all the German major ships at that point are built like that. And they're built like that because here is a pre-dread. Its secondary guns are not just for engaging secondary targets, or for, protecting it from enemy light forces whilst it's fighting the main fleet. No, its secondary guns are a vital part of its actual engagement of the enemy. And here we have 8-inch versus 7-inch. And the 8-inch appears to be wearing. By the way, the two scenarios this can turn into, and it does sometimes turn into, is an absolute Pele battle where they end up getting close with each other because the German AI decides the only way I'm going to win this fight is if I get really, really close. Kind of like Craddock at Cornell or Spey at the Falkland Islands. The only way they're going to win is if they get very, very close and they manage to bash away. But the other times, it goes for a long-range artillery duel. Sometimes it has actually won with the close-in. Sometimes it has won. It has managed to achieve something, which was pretty darn good. But it doesn't always manage to achieve it. And that's its problem. Sometimes they have success. Sometimes they don't. More often than not, they end up doing these long-range engagements. This is now time number 10 for that, it seems. And these long-range engagements really do not suit the German ship. And that is probably down to its designer, i.e. me. I have to admit, it's not the prettiest pre-dreadnought the Germans have ever fielded. Not by a long stretch of the imagination. And that's entirely on me. I feel sorry for Schleswig-Holstein, but McGrath, she's going strong. She has barely been touched. She's been flicked, flummoxed, flashed. She hasn't been struck. Unfortunately for her, neither is Lord Nelson's Revenge. And honestly, Superb is not in the same state as Schleswig-Holstein. In fact, Schleswig-Holstein is in serious doo-doo. Is how we will describe it in technical terms. Serious doo-doo. Ouch. So, when you're talking about secondaries in the pre-dreadnought era, you are talking about weapons which are actually, in many ways, their primary warfighting tool. Because you only carry 4 12-inch guns, and they're in 2 twin turrets, or 4 11-inch guns, and they're in 2 twin turrets, one either end, and yay, they are engaging. Yes, they're going to take time to load, they're going to take time to engage, everything's going to take time. So your 8-inch guns, your 6-inch guns, they become critical because they are going to provide a far greater proportion of your volume of fire, far greater number of your hits. So your key is to maybe engage at long range, your 12-inch, hope you strike a blow which slows the enemy down, makes their maneuvering more difficult, and then close in with the 8-inch. Close in and engage. Close in and crush. But once you're into the Dreadnought era, that's not your point. Your whole point is to stand off and do this artillery-style engagement. Your whole point is to hold your enemy at range. That's when speed starts to matter, but that's also where having the most long-range guns really does have an impact. Because, again, it's the volume of shells. It's a law of large numbers. The more shells you can fire in the right direction, at the right angle, so they hit in the right rough area, the more likely you are to hit the right thing, which will cause the most damage. However, whilst you're doing that and your guns are concentrating, because they need to concentrate on your main enemy threat, that then puts you at risk from being attacked by other things. Those other things can be small vessels, Those other things can be submarines, they can be aircraft, and this is what your secondary weapons then get structured around. What do you think you're going to have to engage? Now, I have said, of course, with HMS Tiger, that HMS Tiger is what she is, and is a battlecruiser hunter, because she has a 6-inch secondary. Now, there are a fair number of people who have disagreed with this assessment. They go, no, no. And I can see why they go, no, no. I can understand their logic and their argument. There is a sensible point behind it. And there is a point also that these things can often have more than one reason behind them. They can sometimes have secondaries and tertiary secondaries in terms of orders of reason, orders of magnitude for why they've done something. But there is the other thing. The Tiger class are designed, well, HMS Tiger is designed to go around hunting down battle cruisers because the Royal Navy is looking ahead. It's not looking at the battle cruisers which are in service now, it's looking at the battle cruisers which are coming. It's thinking about what capabilities they're going to have. It's also thinking that maybe it's not going to be able to get away from them. Maybe it might end up with a closer range duel than it wants to. In which case, well, presumably, enemy battlecruisers have equivalent armor to a British battlecruiser equivalent. And presumably, they will have a similar rate of fire of their main guns as the British. Those aren't assumptions which are bad. They are assumptions which are, broadly speaking, correct. So, and oh my lord, she looks beautiful. In fact, superb looks superb. Just not as threatening as Lord Nelson's Revenge over here. So, you have the 6-inch guns, because they'll provide the volume of fire. If you get... Is it likely you're going to get within 6-inch gun range of the enemy battlecruiser? Well, if you're able to go fast enough to dictate the pace of combat, no, you don't want to. But if you're not able to go fast enough to get away, so you're going to end up with a long-range gunnery duel, well, you want to end that as quickly as possible if you're a battlecruiser. You don't want a long-range gunnery duel, because the more times they fire, the more chances are that they will hit something you don't want them to hit. And a battlecruiser is not designed to take the punishment of a battleship. This means closing into 6-inch gun range and smashing away makes sense. And when you're designed to go out to sea and hunt down enemy battlecruisers, well, a 6-inch gun really starts to make sense. Now, there is another advantage of a 6-inch gun, and that is night fighting. Yes, night fighting. Now, something that isn't really talked about is the RN's doctrine of night fighting prior to World War I. When I say doctrine, I mean penchant towards, because whilst there isn't really much encouragement, there are certain officers who are very interested in it. This includes the Third Sea Lord at the time. They're interested in the idea of doing night actions. They're interested in the idea of using them as an offset strategy. Why? Because whilst the Royal Navy might be massive and overwhelmingly strong, there's no guarantee the politicians will pay the money and life will help out in such a way as to maintain this for you. There are going to be times when you might even find yourself fighting outnumbered, no matter how temporarily that might be. This means you have to think about how quickly you can take down your targets and under what circumstances. And again, the Royal Navy starts to think about night fighting. One of the interesting things I find when I start looking into the interwar period's development of night doctrine and night combat for the Royal Navy is the amounts of treaties and papers they can refer to which are prior to World War I. I know it wasn't fashionable amongst some senior officers, but there certainly seems to be a dedicated bunch, not including to an extent Fisher, but not really including him as much as you might think with Fisher and his particular brand and penchant for action. Well, they were really pushing it. They were really looking at the ideas for night fighting. And I would have to say, one of the things I find most funny about this whole story and this whole bit of history is that the War of the Worlds actually features in some of the discussions. So, in an early augur of what today is considered the modern obsession of sci-fi, featuring into development of military doctrine and military thought, the War of the Worlds has an impact in the early 1900s on the idea of fighting at night. It is one of the more interesting pieces of history to think about, certainly. That, the Royal Navy was thinking about night fighting, especially when you consider what happened to Jutland. Most people consider that a classic example of the Royal Navy being unprepared for night fighting, when actually it's more a case of the preparations for night fighting had not yet reached the senior officers. Jellicoe was to an extent involved, but not as much as really would behove him. Jellicoe is an officer who you would think would be more at the front of things and was certainly pushing it to an extent, but no, more the night fighting doctrine and the people who believed in it, they were living in the Harwich Force. And the trouble is, they were at the wrong end of the line for that particular night engagement. So don't really know whether their options and ideas for night fighting would have worked. But still, that leads us back to Tiger. Interesting enough, if Tiger had been, let's say, under the command of Tirett, well, the odds are she could have been put to some very interesting night fighting duties. Those 6-inch guns, meaning that any target that gets close enough is going to get smattered. It's the 6-inch, 4-inch conundrum again. The British loved the treble 4-inch mount because that would literally overwhelm a light opponent in volume of shells. But the 6-inch gun could do the same thing against a slightly more armoured opponent. The 6-inch gun, if you have enough of them, can provide enough shells going down range to pretty much make the deck an uninhabitable place for any enemy sailor. And that's what they were looking for. That's what the Royal Navy were looking for, and that's what, to an extent, the Germans were looking for. They were looking for a scenario where they could engage advantageously. That's what you're designing your ships for. That's what you're designing your combat and your battle operations for. So it is a complicated discussion. 6-inch versus 4-inch. It is secondaries is a complicated discussion, but honestly, it's less complicated once you get into dreadnoughts than it is when you get into pre-dreadnoughts, because in many cases the secondaries are far more your primary weapons than your theoretically primaries. For example, in this battle, let's be honest, I'm out of 12-inch ammunition. I'm not really bothered. The 8-inch guns will do the pounding for me, especially at the ranges I'm getting it down to. Hopefully, possibly, torpedo will as well. Straight to the coastline, you're still alive. We were 154 rounds in 11-inch. 122 rounds in 11-inch. No rounds in 12-inch left for either of them. Mm-hmm. This is interesting. Hmm. I think on points I'm ahead, but I'm not sure if I'm going to win this one. So let's get back. Pre-dreadnought design. What are the key tenets of it? The key tenets of it are having a ship which can fight everything. A battleship is literally supposed to be a floating fortress. And that's how you must approach it. It's got its big long-range guns for attacking enemy at long range, but that's kind of like your counter-artillery weapons in a fortress. Then it's got its secondaries, which are, as I've said, more like its primaries, which are the guns which are designed for taking out, really causing enemy damage. And in case in a fortress, those be the guns you have which are designed to make it impossible to approach whatever target it's protecting. There usually be not the longest range guns, but there'll be some guns which are, well, let's put it this way, it won't be at the longest range of those, furthest range of those guns. It'll be within moderate distance of those guns. Then it'd have a whole range of defensive guns designed to resist besiegers. Oh, torpedoes. Torpedoes. Ouch. I think you're going in between. Please don't hit, please don't hit, please don't hit. Yay, you're safe. You're both on avoid torpedoes, right? Yes, you are. Mm-hmm. Sorry, South Holstein, you've been hit by a torpedo and you're gone. Torpedoes in dreadnoughts are an extent, a legacy of this era. And a lot of the design issues which crop up in the dreadnought era are to an extent legacy issues from the pre-dreadnought era. For example, casemate guns. It's funny to think about now, and yes, there are some sensible reasons for implementing casemate guns, but from the very beginning, you have designers going, well, can we put these in turrets? Can we put these in turrets? Can we put these in turrets? And it's not for the good of their health. It's because putting them in turrets, if you can put them in a turret, gives you a tremendous advantage in terms of firepower. A casemate weapon can only fire at what it can be pointed at. Now that sounds rather straightforward and sensible. That's obvious, isn't it? It can only fire at what it can point at. But think about what it can be pointed at versus what a gun in a turret can be pointed at. You can do all sorts of things with guns and turrets. You can elevate them far more. You can swivel them round a far degree, and you can link them up with other guns. You can have them paired. You can have them tripled. The moment you start sticking your main battery in turrets is the moment you've really decided that, frankly, turrets are the way to go. And at which point the casemate gun is always going to be in trouble. It's always going to be, well, why are we doing this? Which is one of the reasons why it's so interesting that it hangs on for quite such a long time. And honestly, it's a legacy of the pre-dreads. It doesn't matter how quickly, HMS Dreadnought comes into service. She's lovely, she's gorgeous, we're all happy with her, she's a beautiful ship. But it's almost no time at all before people start going, well, these ships, what guns does she have to deal with this scenario, and this scenario, and this scenario, and this scenario? And you go, she has her main guns. She has 27 single 3-inch guns festooned around her ship as a secondary, but and 5 18-inch torpedo tubes. That's not exactly a bad layout for the time. But there are people, as soon as Dreadnought hits the water, worrying that they've gone too far. That not having that full range of firepower, to quote one lovely article, the full range of firepower was going to cause trouble. And so you get the casemate comes back and people are happy with it, and it's a way of having in even heavier secondaries from the from the days of the 3-inch or 12-pounder guns of the HMS Dreadnought, and then slowly they start to upgrade them. But it takes a disturbingly long time before they start fitting them in turrets in the UK. And honestly, that should have been one of the first things that was being done. Put them in turrets. Give them that field of view and allow yourself to maximize fire at the point you need it. Especially true when you're thinking about it in terms of defensive operations. Because that's what the secondaries become, let's be honest. If you're a battleship, your secondaries are not going to be for your offensive fighting. They're for defensive fighting. That's another reason why when I see a ship which has a whole massive range of secondaries, I go, So you either have no faith in what is titularly your primary weapon, or you do not think you carry enough to actually make the impact you want. Because you're making up for the lack of volume of fire in that area with volume of fire from others. Because again, combat operations, success in these operations is often a product of having the right amount of firepower. Not just the accurate long-range firepower, but the right amount of firepower to overwhelm the target. And it takes a lot to overwhelm a target. Even in the pre-Dreadnought era, it takes a lot to overwhelm the target. Poor Paul Markgraf. The last survivor. The last ugly-looking German pre-Dreadnought. You poor girl. I feel sorry for you. Well, I sort of feel sorry for you. Let's see, how much damage have you guys caused? Mine. Well, yep, Superb has had engine 1 damaged and has had the rudder damaged. Ouch and ouch. Lord Nelson Revenge has had engine 2 damaged and engine 3 damaged, but engine 1 presumably is keeping her going. And she's got a funnel damaged. But she's still got 700 rounds of 8-inch ammunition and 9 torpedoes left. Superb has 700 rounds of 8-inch ammunition and 8 torpedoes left. Oh, I have a feeling. Are you in torpedo range? Oh, you are in torpedo range. That is not good for you, McGrath. That is not good for you. I feel sorry for you. Being in torpedo range is not a good scenario for you, especially as they have 2 torpedo launchers, 2 ships launching torpedoes for your 1. So they could conceivably fire a few more. Now, what adds on to this interest, and it's having a gun for every circumstance, having the weapon for every circumstance, the torpedoes, the varieties of guns, etc., of the pre-Dreadnought era, is of course the modern sort of version of it, which is we have a VLS loaded with the missiles for every circumstance in a standard loadout, which is true. and useful in peacetime because you have no idea what kind of situation you're probably going to come up against. But I wouldn't be surprised if in wartime, barring perhaps self-defense weapons, etc., if you don't find ships focusing down. I wouldn't be surprised if you find, let's see, Arleigh Burks or their sort of equivalents in the US Navy focusing in on air defense missiles, long-range air defense missiles, some defense missiles, etc., but the cruise missiles being shifted off to other ships. You know, people keep talking about perhaps uncrewed vessels with containers on them. Well, that's a perfect thing to either carry loads and loads of reloads of anti-aircraft missiles to come out to the fleet and just fire them off, or to also carry the strike missiles. It becomes even more likely that case when you consider if they're putting strike missiles onto amphibs and other ships, which is not necessarily the most sensible idea. Covered this a few times in bilge pumps. Amphibs are, to an extent, protected by the fact that they are not much of a threat till they get within range to launch troops, and then they suddenly become a big threat. They're targets of opportunities for submarines, but they're not a big threat to an opponent. Whereas the moment they start carrying large numbers of anti-ship missiles and anti-surface missiles, they suddenly push themselves higher up the target chain, which means you have to defend them more. Which conversely means that same missile space which you're planning to hand over to attack missiles probably be needed for defensive missiles. We'll leave that to one side. Ultimately, I would say what caused Cunabetti's work, of course, the Italian gentleman who came up with the idea for a dreadnought battleship in a Tiger War, based on the ideas of Percy Scott and William Sims and all the others working on those sort of towards that end, are the fact that having a gun for every occasion makes it very difficult to train and prepare a crew for war and to fight a war, because you're constantly thinking oh, which gun is best? What should I use? What should I do? And sometimes that is a very interesting debate. Ouch. Ouch. Well, the rumble in the tumble has happened. It has happened. It's happened, and what can we say based off it? Well, my Lord Nelson's rock. Lord Nelson's revenge for the win. But honestly, there's the fact that they pummeled away each other, and it comes out quite even. Yes, the British ships won. But in the end, that's because they have just slightly heavier guns. And it shouldn't be that simplistic. It shouldn't be that simplistic, but it is. Sometimes for all the design, for all the development, for all the work you put into a ship, for all the stuff, it comes down to which ship hits hardest on the day. And that's in a one-on-one fight. What happens when you're in a fleet-on-fleet fight? Which fleet hits hardest on the day? And that can depend what parts of the fleet actually come into the contest and actually come into the fight. But it can also depend on what the individual components of that fleet can contribute to it. An AA cruiser might not contribute much to the offensive firepower of the fleet, but it provides a lot of defensive firepower if you come under air attack. Which means if your enemy's primary attack force is aircraft, and your primary attack force is aircraft, but you have 2 or 3 anti-aircraft cruisers in your fleet, which are terrible for actual surface ship engagements, but can absolutely blast away at aircraft, then you've got an advantage. Your fleet is probably going to come off less bad than the enemy fleet. That's where the advantage of specialist versus generalist ships comes in. A good generalist ship is a ship that can do all roles to an extent, but can be focused in. So if it's got, especially these days, if it's got a VLS, that's got a good load of strategic link VLS cells which can take whatever missiles you want put in there. So you can turn it into an anti-aircraft battery. You can turn it into an anti-sea battery. You can make it what you need. A good general-purpose warship can fill in the gaps and be orientated to the role. A Travel-class destroyer in World War II could do the AA picket role. It had enough power, it could provide a powerful enough radar, it had the guns, especially once it had the 4-inch replacing exposition. It had the guns, it had the firepower, it could do the job. It could do the surface role, because it has the torpedoes, it has the 4.7-inch guns, it can engage from pretty much all surface targets. It can do the anti-submarine role, it can backfill all of them. Is it as good as a cruiser in doing the surface role? No. As good as a battleship? Definitely not. Is it as good as, I don't know, a Hunt-class escort destroyer in the anti-submarine role, or a Black Swan-class sloop? Probably not. It's close, but it's about 80% of the way there, whereas they're about 95% to 100% of the way there. Which isn't a lot, but is a lot when it comes to operational ability. It's only got half the offensive torpedoes of other destroyers, so it isn't going to be the best of the destroyer world, but it's still got those torpedoes. That's a good general purpose asset for World War II. That's a good general purpose asset. But did you hear also the other assets I'm talking about? There are the focused ones, and that's the point. If you have a very small fleet, you are probably going to, your focus is, your idea is either going to be have penny packets of very specialist ships, which means if your odds are you aren't going to have what you need available when you need it. 2 carriers. On the 35s. Or even worse, 1 carrier. Sorry. You know, you need to have the force you want, and you need to have the force available for what you need. Available when you need it. Now, but this surely sounds like I've gone off completely off topic. Alex, this has nothing to do with secondaries, nothing to do with pre-dreads. So you're talking about specialist ships and general purpose ships. Well, it goes back to it, because I've been talking about it on the fleet scale. But if we start, let's focus down onto the ship. Your 12 inches, and your pre-dread. They're for attacking, you're there for long range bombardment, but they're mostly there for show. I'm sorry, the real killing weapons, the real things which are your secondaries. Once you get onto your dreadnoughts, well, suddenly these things going from pretty much for show to being your primary killing asset. Hello. Yeah, that's the real step up in firepower. Because there are lots of battleships going around the world which have 12-inch guns when HMS Dreadnought comes up. That is nothing. It would have almost been as scary as Dreadnought would have been if the Lord Nelsons had 14-inch guns. That would have been as scary, to an extent. And Dreadnought with 14-inch guns would have been, frankly, terrifying. But there are lots of ships around the world with 12-inch guns. What is terrifying about her is the changing from that secondary battery being the killing weapon to having a primary battery being the killing weapon. And suddenly it's finding the purpose for the secondary. And the secondary of Dreadnought secondary, let's see. I wonder what 21 3-inch guns, i.e. 12-pounder, 76mm, are going to be for on a battleship. Taking out torpedo boats and destroyers. Or torpedo boats and torpedo boat destroyers. Yeah. Because everything else is cannon fodder for its main guns, but those things are small enough, light enough, they can hide behind in between waves, especially in the North Sea, and get close enough. So you need to be able to take them out and take them out fast. And then that leads us from the 76mm through to 4-inch ones, and then eventually to Tiger, which is almost a redevelopment of the pre-Dreadnought from the point of view, because when I've said that, the 6-inch guns are part of their ability to kill other battle cruisers. It's also part of their thinking of killing enemy cruisers. It's basically putting down anything which has armor. Merchant cruisers or raiding raiding ships, merchant raiding ships, cruisers, battle cruisers. Putting it down quickly. You don't want to have a prolonged fight in a battle cruiser. You don't have the armor for it. So suddenly, the speed of putting your opponent down starts to matter a lot more again. And that's one of the reasons why the secondary starts to increase. It's also one of the reasons why there was no doubt that the Nelson and Rodney were going to have 9 16-inch guns. There was a reason the RM was pushing for 9 guns, and trust me, if they thought they could get it on the into the existing infrastructure in a way which would make sense, they would have been going for 12 on the G3s. Because it's coming up to that important thing of putting your opponent down quickly again. How do you put them down quickly? How? I hope you found it interesting. I hope you're looking forward to tomorrow's video, which is the long patrol on Admiral Kimmel. Sundays is going to be a normal brew ships. And then Mondays, well, I'm going to record it later this evening. It is the Washington Treaty, as I imagine if it had been done equitably. Take care, thank you, and hope you enjoyed.